It's like so true. All right, I think we'll get started in just a minute. Another gorgeous day in Massachusetts. It's been gorgeous month of May. Good morning. Thanks to everybody for coming, and we'll look forward to what is a full agenda. I don't have many updates, but certainly do want to tell you that we have our next search committee meeting on Thursday. We will be interviewing a set of semifinalists and go from there. So we are keeping on track, and things are moving along. Thanks again to Carolyn and Mary and others for joining the committee. I don't think the Undersecretary has any comments, so I will turn it immediately over to the Commissioner.
Good morning, members of the board, members of the public. I have, I think, what will be a relatively brief update on 4 items that I just wanted to bring to your attention. The first is that in April, on the 23rd, 24th, and 25th, we had our federal monitoring visit from the Office of Child Care. This is the first of what will be monitoring visits on a 3-year cycle by the Office of Child Care. Massachusetts actually was the first to pilot the new monitoring protocol. We were the first state in our region to get a visit from OCC, and we would not expect they will have another monitoring visit for 3 years. The monitoring visit was stated in advance as one in which they would be observing, receiving information, they would ask questions. We wouldn't be receiving any substantive feedback. They weren't going to provide any insight into whether or not there were any areas of concern. Notwithstanding that, the feedback that we did receive in the course of their visit was uniformly enthusiastically positive. There was a lot of positive exchanges that we had over the course of the 3 days. And so I think that was the best we could have hoped for in the course of those 3 days. We expect that we will be receiving verbally some feedback from them over the course of the next couple of weeks. And then there will be a process, again, which they are sort of testing, notwithstanding the fact that this is no longer the pilot phase, but effectively testing out with us, where we'll have a series of exchanges. Should they have any additional questions, we'll be able to continue to provide them with additional information before it would result in a formal report at the end of this monitoring visit. So we expect that that process likely will take at least a couple of months before it's concluded. But I really want to applaud the team here for the work that went into this. Tom Myers in particular, who's not with us today, engaged OCC in a series of conversations and helped organize EEC over the course of about 5 months leading up to this visit, where we provided a lot of advanced information to the Office of Child Care. And we had probably close to 30 staff people who participated in this visit over the course of 3 days. And we had partners in the field because OCC was interested in going out and visiting our regional offices, and they did in Lawrence and in Worcester, as well as the CCR&Rs in both of those regions. So we had support coming from all quarters for this visit. So it was a very positive experience, and I wanted to pass that along. And we'll, of course, provide you with information once we hear back from the Office of Child Care about any questions that they may have, and particularly if we get to the place in which they've issued a formal report, the information that might be contained within that report. So I'm happy to take any questions on that item before I get to my next one. It's a shorter table here today, so I don't have to look very far to see and read your faces.
I don't have a question, Tom, but I do just want to echo, having sat in on a couple of those sessions, that the response seemed to be very positive, and the team was really well prepared, and that served us well on policy fronts and IT fronts. Both the federal staff there seemed very impressed with all the work. Thank you.
Thank you, Undersecretary. See, so it's not just my eternal optimism. It's been validated by the Undersecretary. The next 2 items I will report on together because they sort of fit nicely together. There are 2 programs that EEC has been working on with the Executive Office of Health and Human Services, both of which are being launched in the course of this month. They're new child care programs to respond to needs that were identified within Health and Human Services by DTA and the Department of Children and Families, respectively. The first is what is being called the Working Relative Caregiver Child Care Program. So this is to provide child care to relatives of children who are part of the DTA caseload. The relatives themselves are not part of the DTA caseload and therefore aren't entitled to DTA benefits. However, they've taken on responsibility for caring for these children for a variety of reasons, and this has been a growing issue within DTA in recent years, and there's believed to be a real strong correlation in particular to the opioid epidemic. And so DTA had estimated that there were about 900 children who would be involved in a program such as this. I wouldn't call it back of the envelope. There's some methodology behind that, but I think it's going to be tested, of course, over the course of implementation. And we engaged with them in designing the program, and that program is being initiated this month. And we're going to want to continue to monitor that program and report on this new program to the board as part of our caseload on an ongoing basis. And this will surface later on in the presentation, so I wanted to provide some initial context for that program. The second program that I wanted to note is what's known as the DCF Short-Term Child Care Program. This actually is a program that doesn't fall within our CCDF funded child care because it's not intended to provide a 12-month authorization. It's exactly what you would expect. It's short-term child care. Again, a growing issue for DCF in recent years has been that they are in fact inheriting children in the course of any given day, and they don't have capacity naturally within DCF to provide those children with supports and with child care in the course of that day. So this program is intended to give them access to short-term child care, which will be defined as over a couple of weeks and if need be extended a little bit further than that. But that program would enable DCF to be able to put children into programs which have been previously vetted with EEC and have the ability to take those children in on a short-term basis. And that will relieve the area offices of having to try to attend to those children's needs in conjunction with trying to do their day-to-day work and what would naturally be expected of the DCF area offices. So I wanted to note that program as well, and again, there'll be reference to this a little later in one of the presentations. And I'm happy to take any questions relative to those items if you have them. Okay.
Just say we did discuss it at the fiscal meeting with Bill this morning, so got a little preview.
Great, excellent. And then my final item that I wanted to reference is that the Early Childhood Service Organization effort, or the ECSO effort, we, as I noted to you previously, we had entered into a formal relationship with New Profit. We've been working with New Profit now for over a year and a half in trying to design an effort that would support child care programs who are participating within the ECSO effort in alignment with our quality rating and improvement system as revised by this board in its vote in the fall. And that the ECSO effort has reached a new stage whereby through partnership with New Profit, we have posted an RFP to solicit applications for organizations to serve as ECSOs. That was posted last week, and we expect that we'll be getting responses over the course of the upcoming month, and that we begin a process of working with New Profit to make determinations as to whether or not those responses meet our needs and make selections on the basis of the applications that we receive. So we hope to be able to make determinations on that by the end of this fiscal year so that we could start to work with those selected parties early in FY20 and begin to launch this initiative in full in FY20. And so I already know that I have at least one question based on the hand that's raised across from me. Mary?
Tom, I did receive a phone call from someone who is going to respond, so I have a question. They alluded to needing to have some kind of meetings in the region. Can you talk a little bit about something? There's something in the first of all, my first question actually is, where is the RFP? Is it on our website? Is it on the website?
It's posted,
Okay.
yes, on our website.
Thank you.
Come by us.
And then again, they alluded to something about they need to have meetings with providers. Can you just talk about that?
Sure. So an important component for any ECSO is going to be their ability to be able to recruit providers into this process. Ultimately, we're looking to develop capacity at the ECSO level in service of being able to support childcare programs. And so we as a part of our RFR process and part of what would be required of anybody who would receive this contract, we want them to be able to demonstrate that they're establishing such relationships, because we really do want this initiative to be able to take flight in FY20. So that's part of the requirement, and usually as part of this process, and I don't think that there would be any exception in this case, we accept questions as part of an FAQ, and we can try to provide some feedback to folks in the course of this process.
And the selection of the ECSOs is not going to, it will be a department decision, correct?
So by agreement of New Profit and EEC, anybody who is selected has to be jointly selected by both EEC and New Profit. So EEC effectively has, and New Profit effectively has a veto on anything by way of a selection. So it would have to be one that's approved by both entities.
So just on that note, do we want to give board members guidance in terms of A, fine to answer those questions to the best of your knowledge, but B, who should they direct people to on this?
Please, if you would like, send any questions that you receive to myself. I would be happy to work with Anita Moeller and our team who's been working.
Support myself and my one-year-old daughter, Razia. I work full-time and my days are long. I get up at 4:30 in the morning so I can get my daughter and myself ready and leave the homeless shelter in Brighton, where we live, at 6:30 a.m. I take buses to get her to family, daycare in Watertown, and then get to my job at another homeless shelter in Cambridge. At the end of the day, I take more buses out to my father's home in Waltham to get my daughter. He picks her up from daycare because I can't get there in time. Then I take my daughter back to the shelter in Brighton, arriving between 7:30 and 8:30 at night. I have to call the ride for the last leg of the trip because I can't walk up the hill to the shelter. I have an inoperable mass on my lung that leaves me short of breath all the time. I can't go upstairs. Because of this condition, I was recently hospitalized with pneumonia for a week. When I don't work, I don't get paid, but I still have to pay for childcare so I don't lose Razia's spot. I'm grateful to have childcare for my daughter, but I'm worried about being able to keep up with the co-payments of $82.50 per week. This is over 14% of the income I make, even when I don't miss any work due to my illness. Paying these fees every week without any flexibility is a burden. Since I live in shelter, I've been able to make the co-payment so far because I'm not paying for rent or utilities right now. I only fell behind 1 week on my co-payments once when I was in the hospital. Even then, the Child Care Network was already calling me and saying I could lose my voucher. Moms like me need to have some breathing room when we miss a payment. While I'm in shelter, I'm supposed to be saving 30% of income to help me afford permanent housing, but I haven't been able to do that. After paying for childcare and everything else, there just isn't enough left. I'm finally supposed to be getting a housing voucher later this month. I'm very happy about that, but I'm also worried about how I will afford everything once I'm paying for rent, light, and gas. I'm asking the Department of Early Education and Care to lower co-payments so they are affordable. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anna, I'm sorry, I don't have your last name down on this.
Poblacion.
Poblacion.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Welcome, Children's Health Watch. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for having us. Dear members of the Massachusetts Board of Early Education and Care, I'm Anna Poblacion, and a research scientist with Children's Health Watch at Boston Medical Center. Children's Health Watch is a network of pediatricians, public health researchers, and children's health and policy experts, and we know that access to childcare is an essential cornerstone in supporting the health and development of young children. I'm here today to discuss the cost of childcare in Massachusetts and to provide supporting information to ensure childcare is not out of reach for families who need it. An extensive body of scientific evidence, including research from Children's Health Watch, shows the first years of life are critical period for brain and body growth. This is the time when infants and toddlers form the fundamental neurological architecture of the brain and central nervous system that they will need and have for the rest of their lives. During these formative years, a nurturing and safe environment is important to support health and ability to gain the knowledge, education, and skills necessary to thrive. Childcare, particularly high quality, formal childcare, such as childcare centers and preschools, is expensive in Massachusetts. On average, the annual cost of infant care in a center was more than $20,000 in 2017. Single parents in Massachusetts spend nearly 70% of their income on childcare, and a married couple with 2 children and incomes at the poverty line would have to spend over 100% of their income to afford childcare. 1/3 of families we interviewed at Boston Medical Center between 2012 and 2017 reported that the inability to afford childcare made working or going to school difficult. Childcare affordability, which we refer to as childcare constraints. For these families, lack of access to affordable childcare acts as a barrier to stable employment, and these families are also more likely to report economic hardships compared to families who are not experiencing childcare constraints. Data also show that many families in Massachusetts, despite receiving a childcare subsidy, pay more than the 7% of their income toward childcare, the national benchmark for childcare affordability set by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. Therefore, these families, even though they have a subsidy, are still childcare burdened. Families who receive a subsidy should not experience childcare cost burden or childcare constraints. Thus, we recommend the Department of Early Education and Care to limit copayment fees for childcare subsidies to no more than 7% of families' income for families with incomes above 100% of the federal poverty level to reflect the HHS's recommendation for affordable childcare subsidy copayment. And for families below 100% of FPL, we recommend the department to eliminate the copayment fees for childcare subsidies. We also recommend the department reduce and eliminate wait lists for high-quality, affordable childcare programs for low-income families. By doing so, we would be supporting caregiver full-time employment and education, which in turn would reflect in their children's health. Thank you for your time and for considering these recommendations.
Thank you. Thank you, Anna. Did you want to, Bill Eddy has joined us and he would like to make public comment for MADCA.
Thank you. Sorry for getting a little bit late. Mary, I'm impressed. Mass Pike was brutal today. Thank you very much. My name is William Eddy. I'm the Executive Director of the Mass Association of Early Education and Care. And I apologize for being late. And so if I cover anything the Commissioner already explained, I apologize for that. I'm here to talk about the second item on your agenda, which is the subsidy regulation, the rate reserve, well, it's not a rate reserve, the rate change to the market rate formula change. Usually when we have rate increases, there are moments for us to celebrate and come up and say, this is great, thank you so much. This isn't one of those that we're doing cartwheels over. Acknowledging that we have rates that are below the 25th percentile is not really a banner day. But we do look forward to having them adjusted, and we look forward to working with you further on the market rate process. Two quick points. One, as this board and the department looks to fund this increase, we urge you strongly not to look toward a prospective rate increase that will be coming, hopefully, through the legislature and hopefully to be signed by the governor. We urge you to look at two pools of money. The first is, and we've appreciated working with the Assistant Secretary on this issue, one is the unspent CCDBG discretionary funding amount that was sent to Massachusetts this year, the $29 million. We don't believe it's been completely spent. We'd urge you to look to that funding pool. The money was sent from the same pool of money, the CCDBG, and would make perfect sense to use. A secondary area to look at is EEC, once again, by our latest count, is on pace to surplus a significant amount of money again. We'd urge you, if you don't want to look at the CCDBG funding, to look at packing and carrying over funding for this purpose. We think those two pools of money make far better sense than looking to any prospective rate increase that the field is working hard to attain, that you called for in your aspirational budget last December, and that would be best spent across the board helping all providers, rather than select a few who are below the 25th percentile. Finally, process-wise, we've made no secret, and many of our members have made no secret of our dislike at times for the market rate process. When you folks met maybe a year or two ago, out at the Basketball Hall of Fame in Springfield, a number of Western Mass providers took the opportunity to explain to the board why they thought it was unfair to Western Massachusetts. So without going back through that, we've been appreciative of your inclusiveness. Our folks have worked with Bill Concanon and the commissioner on this process. There's more to be done. And I know as we go through a transition here at the department, I'd ask the board to, especially through your fiscal committee, to take a good look and work with providers about how do we get to rates that are far more cost-based, that reflect the reality of what is quality, not what people charge. What people charge is not a true barometer of what quality is. And so we ask that you take this exercise as an excuse to once again look at what is a good process for developing a market rate, and what are true catchment areas. Maybe the regional areas aren't the true catchment areas. So I thank you for the process you've undertaken, and while we don't celebrate this rate increase, we appreciate what you're doing, and we ask that you look at the proper way to fund it and look to use this to look at the process going forward. I thank you for your time.
Thank you. All right, we'll move now to routine business. We have an updated set of minutes in front of us that were placed in front of you this morning. They certainly reflect a few things we noted in the prior version, so I don't have any further amendments or corrections. Anybody else? Great. So we'll move to approve the minutes of the April 9th board meeting. Second? All in favor? Aye. Thank you. Okay, thanks. We'll also now move to updates. We have an update from the Workforce Committee that will start with Eleonora and move to Joan, and then we will hear from Dave on fiscal. Thank you. Eleonora.
The Workforce Committee met on May 9th, and we had a full agenda, and I'm going to give you updates on 2 of the agenda items, and then Joan will add the third. The first agenda item is that we spent probably about an hour of the meeting looking at family engagement and the framework of family engagement in Massachusetts, and we discussed it, we listened to it, and then we are beginning to do work related to connecting the family engagement framework with the QRIS. And at this point, a lot of what the Workforce Committee is going to be doing is related to relating the discussions that we're having with QRIS, so that we're trying to have everything aligned in the department and all the efforts, so that we are not going in different directions. The second thing that we did was to spend some time looking at the career pathway. And initially, if you remember, I think the last time that I reported, we talked about the career pathway for center-based, and this time we spent a little bit more time looking also at the other systems, at the family care providers and at the out-of-school time career pathway. And then we spent a significant amount of time talking about the next focus that will be competency measurement, and how are we going to be developing measurements of all these very different steps in the career ladder in the 3 different program types that we have. So with that, we continue to work, as I said, in aligning everything the best way that we can to the QRIS and looking at next steps. There is a lot of work going on workforce, which is very exciting to see. And we had an opportunity to meet with the Workforce Council, and that's what Joan is going to be reporting on, because I needed to leave about 10 minutes after we met with them. So, thank you, Joan.
Good morning. We did have an opportunity to have some shared time with the Workforce Council. It is a large and diverse body of stakeholders that's coming together in support of the work of EEC, and it's really an important opportunity for us to leverage expertise as well as the sort of reach and breadth of a group of that nature in furtherance of the workforce system here. And so we did some thinking about ways to best engage with the Workforce Council and also bring their efforts into alignment with the work of the board and the subcommittee that's focused on workforce. And so we came to them with two proposals. The first is that we ask EEC to develop a strategic document that would essentially do three things that would help to further this sort of new phase of work relative to both workforce and program quality. The first component would be to look really systemically at the very sort of disparate and discrete strands of work that are underway to really describe the complete vision for the new workforce development and program quality system that's underway. A lot of that work is present. It just hasn't yet been pulled together in a way that I think is easy for everyone to communicate around or to advance. And so one component would be around articulating a vision. The second would be to really begin to map out which components of the system as we go forward, particularly under things like StrongStart, career pathways, the training and technical assistance, the ECSO RFPs that are increasingly being put forward, to really understand which facets of the system are designed to serve which facets of the mixed delivery and educator provider system, so that we can also do a gap analysis and figure out what we might be missing. And then the third piece would be a sort of high-level tactical implementation plan. In order for all of this work to go forward, it's like a puzzle, and each piece sort of builds upon the next. And so really outlining what needs to happen when in order to bring this vision to fruition. Our recommendation is that this kind of a document could be really useful at the agency level. It could also be a touchstone for the Workforce Council to help guide their engagement in work. It would also position the Workforce Committee and this board to think more strategically about the effort, and also bearing in mind the upcoming transition at the commissioner level would be a really productive way to help situate a new commissioner to keep this really critical work advancing. So that was one of the things that we touched on, and there was broad support for the creation of that kind of a document. The second thing we spoke about was the prospect of engaging the Workforce Council on the board's work relative to developing a budget recommendation in FY21. And so what we proposed is that the Workforce Council would have some joint meeting time with the Workforce Committee of the board in both October and December to talk about FY21, essentially to bring recommendations to the committee that we would then bring to the board for the larger group's consideration.
Thank you. Questions?
Joan, I guess my only question is I'm a little bit unclear. Who is creating the strategic document that you're proposing?
The proposal is that EEC would take charge of creating that.
And in some ways, I guess from my point of view, I am very sympathetic to the need to kind of have a good look at all the moving parts. It's certainly a new chapter in this work and sort of advancing a workforce agenda. And it seems to me we're talking in part about something quite visual, to have a good look at the landscape, which would help as sort of an educative piece, but also kind of project management kind of feel to it. I think we're talking about, in my view, great idea, short, technical kind of document that is really about this implementation, and to think this like next 2 and 3 years, right? So the IT piece that drives the QRS implementation in some respects, et cetera. So I really appreciate that. I'm in strong support, and I think we can circle back and talk about how that might work capacity-wise, and to the extent there's some support needed from the outside, how we might make that happen. Thank you.
Thank you. The only other thing I just would encourage, especially as you're connecting what you just described, Joan, and I like Noni, the way you kind of re-articulated it, and the budget ask is working closely with the Workforce Skills Cabinet and with the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education on all of the interrelated efforts that are happening in those areas, and that just makes that map a little bit more complicated,
Yeah.
but it also can hold the efforts together in a really different way than if EEC were just trying to do that independently.
We would love to, and would welcome some guidance from you as to when and how to best do that.
And
I would-
I'm sorry, Tom.
No.
One of the things that was mentioned by a member of the Workforce Council was that it was a good idea to actually meet the three boards together.
Yeah.
And that to plan that strategically in the fall,
Yep.
to have EEC, ESC, and higher education together for
That
once.
would be a really interesting idea.
Yeah.
Really, thanks.
I just wanted to note that the Executive Office of Labor and Workforce Development is represented on this council by Jennifer James, so there's an ability for us to be able to account for those items that you mentioned, Undersecretary, as part of the conversation that's happening at the council level. Obviously, there would be other opportunities for us to do that accounting as well, but it could naturally happen at the council level as well, which is helpful.
Well, thanks to you both for your leadership and to everybody for their input. That sounds exactly right, and I particularly also appreciate the conversations in the fall to drive a budget ask that there's some consistency, that we're sort of on message in all working towards the same goal. That's great. Dave, we'll turn it over to you on fiscal. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chairperson. The Fiscal Committee met this morning and heard a presentation on caseload from Carol Meehan with some supportive comments from Bill. We had a really robust discussion looking at our slot utilization going back a year, and we know the department is presently looking at the issue of slot utilization, and we, as I said, had a very robust discussion and are going to continue to have that discussion in June, and we felt that it was a very, very positive meeting.
All right, we'll turn now to our items for discussion and in several cases a vote. Starting with the background record check regulations, some technical and definition updates that are really as a function of having gone down the road of developing this work and further towards implementation. I think some decisions here and recommendations to us that make perfect sense in light of where the work is at. So I'll turn it over now to Denise Carlin. Thank you, Denise.
Good morning. Thank you, Chair Lisseau, Undersecretary Reale, Commissioner Weber, and members of the board. I know you've seen background record checks on your agenda numerous times over the past couple of years, and you're seeing them again because we are now in the process of implementing them, and anytime you implement something new, you find out that there are some small areas that need fixing. And that's exactly what we have here. So the purpose of this presentation is to address those particular areas that do need fixing. The proposed changes are very discrete and only in specific areas, and we are doing them as what is known as emergency regulations, and I will get into that further on in the presentation. You have an outline of the presentation in front of you. We'll look a little bit at the history of background record checks and the IT project update. Then we'll describe the proposed regulatory changes, and we'll look at the timeline going forward. And then you have appendices just to refresh your memories about background record checks if they needed any refreshing. So the background record check regulatory history is that EEC amended its background record check regulations in November of 2017. And this was in response to changes from the federal requirements under the CCDBG Reauthorization Act of 2014. There were certain provisions that we had to implement, such as requiring to reduce the turnaround time, to have mandatory disqualifications, requiring EEC to review all the background record check information, and requiring transferability of a background record check suitability determination. These regulations were officially implemented as of October 1st, 2018. After implementing the regulations a little over 6 months ago, we found that we needed to make some discrete changes in order to align with the federal requirements and to clarify some language ambiguities. So we are proposing that these changes go forth as emergency regulations in order to meet deadlines imposed by the federal government as of September 30th, 2019. If we had to go forward under the usual regulatory process, it would take much longer and we wouldn't meet our September 30th, 2019 deadline. The IT project history. EEC has been working to implement changes to the IT system to correspond to the changes in the regulations. Part of the new system was rolled out to group and school-age childcare in February 2019, and it is expected that there will be further rollouts throughout the summer of 2019. Implementation for the process it also includes CCDBG licensed exempt programs that are funded through CCDBG funding. Family childcare providers and residential and placement programs will remain within the IT legacy system after September 30th, 2019, because they are not required to be part of the new system under the CCDBG requirements. So there will be some situations where the two systems will be running simultaneously. So here are the proposed changes that we propose to make. There are essentially 4 areas. First is the transfer of suitability. Under CCDBG requirements, EEC is mandated to ensure that BRC suitability determinations are transferred among child care programs in order that background record checks don't have to keep being rerun. Under the existing process right now, they have to complete a CORI and DCF check, and then to work at a new program. If certain criteria are met, the candidate can transfer the suitability determination after the fingerprinting determination is suitable or not suitable. The process that must happen by September 30th of 2019, however, is EEC is redesigning its IT system to propose that all checks, CORI, DCF, SORI, and fingerprint. Right now, the CORI and DCF checks are separated out, are done at the same time for each individual rather than done in batches through programs, and then apply the suitability decisions across programs to align with CCDBG. Under the existing regulations right now, you can run a new BRC and not do the suitability transfer if the candidate is moved outside of Massachusetts for more than 30 days, if they have new criminal or child welfare or sex offender information, the candidate has a break in employment of 1 year, the EEC program discovers the candidate has provided false and misleading information, the candidate is involved in any other investigation, or for purposes of resolving pending BRC information. For example, if there's some questions about identity, for example, sometimes they're run where there's been transposition of letters and they need to be rerun again. Now, the regulatory changes for transfer suitability state that one thing that we need to do is we need to change that 1 year break in service to 180 days. The federal requirements are now 180 days rather than a year for the break-in service, so it's a shorter break-in service time, which would be good because that shows you that the people who have the chance to commit some sort of crime while not working in the child care field will be caught more frequently than if you allow for the 1 year determination. So that change is being made specifically to align with the federal requirements. In addition, because of the way that our systems, our IT systems are working, we also need to rerun the background record checks if candidates are changing program types. For example, if they're switching over and a candidate is now in family child care and wants to work in group child care, or vice versa. We need to rerun them because they're currently included in different legacy systems. The suitability transfer determinations cannot be transferred over. So we're adding a new section to the regulations, and that's section 14.093G that's quoted in front of you. We're recommending this change to allow the flexibility to have the information transfer between the EEC legacy system and the new BRC Navigator system without being too cumbersome. And we have checked, and that is acceptable as a reason to rerun BRCs under the federal requirements. The other changes that we are proposing in the regulation is we just needed to clarify some language in the presumptive disqualification definition. We have 3 tables for disqualifications. We have mandatory, presumptive, and discretionary. Mandatory are convictions for crimes that are listed by the federal government in the CCDBG regulations. Those are absolutely set in stone. And what we have done is, though, if it's a non-conviction for a mandatory offense, then it is a presumptive offense. However, there are a number of other offenses that are presumptive as well. And those, however, are not necessarily mandatory offenses, but are considered very serious. They're primarily drug offenses. The way our language was originally reading is that all non-convictions or non-delinquent offenses would apply on the presumptive table, and that is not necessarily the case. The only time a non-conviction applies as a presumptive offense is if it's for a mandatory crime. If it's not a mandatory crime, in order to be presumptive, it has to be a conviction. So we just want you to clarify that language. In addition, we want to clarify language around volunteers. Originally, we had talked about regular volunteers and someone coming in to a program on a regular basis. However, under guidance from the federal requirements, it's clear that the feds want to make it easy for the person, say the grandmother who wants to come in to read to her grandchild's class once a week. She comes in regularly like clockwork, but she stays for about an hour. She is continuously supervised. That is the key. A volunteer must be supervised at all times. If the volunteer is supervised at all times, we are saying under our regulations and in compliance with CCDBG requirements that the volunteer does not have to have a BRC run. This is a change, and this is to eliminate the person who does want to come in regularly. Now, on the other hand, if you come in on a non-regular basis, but you have the potential to have unsupervised access to children, you do have to be run. So we clarified our volunteer language. And finally, we clarified language involving provisional status. Under our current background check regulations, which were implemented in October of 2018, a staff member can work provisionally while being supervised once they have cleared the fingerprint and the SORI check. However, in our regulations, it wasn't clear that that does not apply to licensees, the holder of a family child care license or the holder of any type of group, school age, or residential placement license. The reason for that being is the licensee obviously has no one to supervise them. Once again, that complies with the federal requirements. So we are making it clear in our regulations that provisional status does not apply to licensees. We had been doing that by policy, but we want it very clear and upfront in the regulations. So the timeline for this is we're presenting it today to the board for a vote to adopt these regulations. Excuse me. If they're adopted today, they would be adopted on an emergency basis. What that means is the usual regulatory process is regulations are adopted, they're put out for public comment, but they do not become effective until after the public comment period, and they come back for review and are then officially promulgated. In the case of an emergency regulation, the regulation becomes effective immediately upon being sent to the Secretary of State's office. Then there is a 90-day window for public comment to occur, and then any changes from that public comment have to be made within that 90-day window. Before the 90-day window is up, the agency has the choice of filing what's called a notice of compliance, where there are no changes to the regulation, or a notice that these are the changes that we propose to make. So on your timeline, we have them going over to the Secretary of State's office tomorrow. Then they'll be published in the Massachusetts Register at the end of May, because the Register only comes out every 2 weeks. And of course, we're missing this Friday's deadline because you need to send it in 2 weeks in advance. Then we'll have a public comment period throughout June. And then anytime after July 1st, we can adopt the regulations. What we're asking is that if no changes are being recommended, that we be allowed to file the notice of compliance without it going back to the board for a vote, because the problem is that the next scheduled board meeting that these regulations could come forward to would have to be in September, which is after the 90-day window. So that would create a problem as far as implementation of the regulation from the standpoint of the Secretary of State's office, because if you don't take action within the 90 days, those emergency regulations automatically expire and you go back to the old regulations. So what we're asking is, if there are no changes, that we be allowed to implement them. If there are changes, that the board designate an individual, we're proposing the general counsel, be allowed to authorize those changes so that we can implement the regulatory adoption, which would have to be done prior to August 13th of 2017. And at this point, I open it up for any discussion.
Denise, thank you for all your hard work. I wanted to go back to the example you used of the volunteer who comes in every day consistently for an hour on a regular basis. If that volunteer were to come in for a half a day on a scheduled basis, would we be taking the same position relative to the CBC? Or
We'd
is
have
it-
to
or
look
is- Or is the decision based on the length of time that the person is present at the site?
It's really not either. It's on whether or not the person has the potential for unsupervised contact with children. A half a day, there is a lot more potential for unsupervised contact because staff may
Exactly, right.
need breaks. You may have issues where a staff has to go home sick. So there could be a lot more. You could make an argument that the longer the person comes in, the more the potential for unsupervised contact comes in, and therefore the person should be run. We can work on a policy that outlines those types of situations. I use the hour obviously because that's extreme, but it's not the regularity. We wanted to eliminate the whole issue of regular volunteers. That's not the key for the federal requirements, nor should it be the key for us.
Thank you.
I have, oh, no, go ahead.
Thank you, Denise, as well. I just have a question, and maybe I'm the only one who doesn't understand this, but there's a statement in your presentation. It says, family child care providers and residential and placement programs will remain within the IT legacy system after September 19 because they are not required to be in the IT new system to meet CDBG requirements. Can you just explain that?
A lot of that has to go to the development of how the systems were worked, and a lot of it had to go to how the BRCs had been run in the past, because the programs before had been receiving notifications directly for Corey and DCF, and they will not be anymore, so the new system covers that. The old system for family child care is that everything came through us. For residential and placement, none of this is required by CCDBG. What we are doing is to have everything aligned, and so we don't end up with a two-tiered system. So that's really why that statement is in there.
Mary, I can just add on to Denise's comments. We're in compliance already with respect to family child care within our existing IT system, specifically because the reason that we're already conducting reviews of all family child care. A big new component of the work for EEC under the new CCDBG is that we're going to have to conduct the reviews as well for group and school age programs. So our current IT system supports our CCDBG requirements for family child care. Notwithstanding that, for a variety of reasons, we don't want to maintain two IT systems on an ongoing basis. So we prioritize family child care behind group and school age as we roll this new system forward. So it will be part of a future phase. Family child care will come into the new system, as will our residential programs as well. So it's really just a phasing consideration. We're not maintaining the legacy system indefinitely. We just don't need to lead with family child care because we're in compliance with the federal laws as is. Does that help?
And actually, I would add to that, and we've had discussions about this when we haven't made any decisions, depending on when the new system is completely integrated and completely phased, that new section we're adding, that section, section G, may become no longer necessary, and further on down the road, we can decide either not to use it because you don't have to apply all of your regulations, or if we ever do another revamping of the BRC regs and the new systems are up and working, we could eliminate it.
I have a question. Yeah, going back to the language of volunteer. If I'm reading this correctly, then no student teacher would need to go through the process because they are not supposed to be ever without supervision, even though they are there every day.
No, we do recommend that interns do go through. This is only for volunteers, not for interns. Student teachers are considered interns.
They are not considered volunteers, even though they
No.
don't get paid.
Nope. No, sorry.
That's
We actually do have a definition of intern. I'm sorry, I could look it up for you, but we do have a separate definition of volunteer and a separate definition of intern. An intern is someone basically who is working through some sort of a set program in order to gain some sort of educational advantage or some sort of learning experience. A volunteer is basically an unpaid helper.
Okay, great, thank you.
Other comments or questions? Go ahead.
It just occurred to me, just a suggestion, and I apologize in advance to our staff because this creates more work for us, but I just think will be helpful. What's not included here is that at the conclusion of this public comment period, as we laid forward, there may be no public comment, in which case we would not be recommending any changes and we could just move forward. Or, as was noted, there may be some public comment that would necessitate changes, and we're asking for the ability to be able to go forward with that. We will provide a report on the public comment to the board, and I would suggest that we do that through the chairperson so that you have information relative to where we stand before we would be proceeding with either of the two directions that we laid out. So I would
Yeah, that's
Oh,
great.
yes.
note that
Yes,
right
absolutely.
on or around July 1st, we would
Right.
be in a position to be able to start to generate that report and issue that report to you, if that makes sense.
Just building on that, Commissioner, I think it's possible that there might be some non-controversial changes, so it might just be that if no substantive changes are made to the emergency reg based on the public comment, they'd move forward. Just to clarify that there may still be some small changes which wouldn't require board attention but might still be necessary.
Yeah, I could see possible changing of a couple of words or some grammatical things.
Other comments or thoughts on this? Particularly the process going forward, since I know at this moment we're sort of delegating, deputizing, if you will, the agency to move this along. Seems fine to me, and appreciate the careful work here, and certainly what this represents, which is all of the work towards the implementation of the new regulations, which I know has been just a tremendous undertaking. So why don't I make the motion? Move that the board, in accordance with Massachusetts General Law C-15D-3, hereby approves the amended regulations governing criminal offender information and other background record checks, and authorizes the Commissioner of Early Education and Care to file the amended regulations with the Secretary of the Commonwealth for publication in the Massachusetts Register for promulgation on an emergency basis as 606 CMR 14, consistent with the department's proposed policy directions and subject to the approval of the final regulations by the board or its designee. Thank you. All in favor? Abstentions? Anyone opposed? Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Great.
Thank you. Have a great day.
You too. Great. So we will move now to our next agenda item, which is around the subsidy rate adjustment, whereby we will have a presentation from Carol Meehan and Bill Kincannon, and look towards a vote.
Carol did all the work on this. Carol is presenting it. I'm here just to look pretty.
So I'm here with Santa Claus today to present the rate increase for childcare subsidy rates below the 25th percentile. So the Administration of Children and Families, just a little background, has long established a benchmark of the 75th percentile of market rates to be regarded as providing equal access. We do want to note this standard was not an actual legal mandate, but was stated in the final rule as an important benchmark for gauging equal access. And states have traditionally been allowed to document other ways to show equal access. Just as a reminder for everyone what the 75th percentile is, that is a term used to describe the base subsidy rate that would enable a parent to afford 75% of the options for privately purchased care of a certain type within a region of the state. The base subsidy rate is the lowest rate paid prior to any additional payments for things like the QRIS bonus, transportation, add-on rate, or anything else. So in February 2019, ACF notified states with the lowest rates, decided by ACF as any rates below the 25th percentile, that states were being placed on a corrective action plan to address compliance with the equal access provision. ACF made it clear to states that this is the first such action, but that states should expect similar processes in the future state plan cycles, with the potential for that lowest threshold to actually be higher than the 25th percentile. So the next time around, they may choose the 30th percentile or something like that. When asked about the prioritization of funds, because this is always a balancing act, and if ACF would prefer that states provide access for families or rate increases for providers, ACF clearly indicated that their preference is for rate increases to providers as their top priority. So our current issue, as you can probably guess by why we're here today, in February 2019, Massachusetts was one of the states notified by ACF that the Commonwealth was being placed on the corrective action plan to address compliance with the equal access provision. They found that based on the results of our recent market rate survey, some of our EEC reimbursement rates were inadequate. Upon review, we have identified 11 current rates that fall below the 25th percentile of the most recent market rate survey, as we'll detail on the next slide. To remove the cap, Massachusetts will need to increase all base rates up to at least the 25th percentile to come into compliance with this provision, no later than September 30th, 2019. Failure to be compliant could result in a penalty as allowable under CCDF, and that would likely be a reduction of the next federal discretionary award. So this chart shows the 11 identified rates, and to address this cap, we do need to increase them to the listed 25th percentile rate. We do note that you will see 2 Head Start full day and 2 kindergarten full day rates on this chart as well. That is because they are tied to the preschool rate, and we want to make sure that we maintain all Head Start full day and all kindergarten full day as equal to the preschool rates. So when we increase the Region 2 and Region 4 preschool, we also need to increase those rates as well. No other regions will be affected, including rates in regions already above the 35th percentile, the transportation rate, the FCC system admin rate, and the supportive teen and homeless add-on rate. So it'll only be these rates highlighted in yellow. The cost of this rate increase is estimated to be around $7.2 million in FY20. Assuming board approval of the rate increase today, these new rates will be implemented by EEC as of July 1st to ensure full compliance well ahead of the September 30th deadline. Going forward, EEC and the board may want to consider the guidance given by ACF as future rate increases are proposed and approved, including evaluating if other percentile increases should be considered in advance of the next state plan cycle to prevent another corrective action plan. The next state plan cycle, for everyone's information, will begin prior to the start of federal fiscal year 2022, which is October 1st, 2021, with another market rate survey required prior to plan submission. If the schedule follows what it has previously, that means we would be doing the market rate survey would be completed in early calendar year 2021, and the state plan would need to be submitted during the summer of 2021. So absorbing the cost in FY20. So the projected $7.2 million cost will be funded by the final FY20 state budget, though the department and the board will need to remain especially vigilant about the FY20 caseload funding and expenditures in light of the following anticipated and new programmatic commitments, 2 of which Tom described earlier. All of these are not included in the governor's FY20 budget recommendation. This includes the Family Child Care Collective Bargaining Agreement. Their current contract expires on June 30th. The cost of this is unknown. The DCF Emergency or Short-Term Child Care Program, the DTA Guardian Program, and this 25th percentile. The department, in collaboration with the board, ANF, and EOE, will need to assess the FY20 state budget on an ongoing basis to determine whether available funding supports all projected expenditures. In the case of a budget exposure, options would include seeking mid-year supplemental funding, which ANF has already discussed with EEC as a possibility should an exposure exist, or control spending in proportion to the projected deficit. We'll continue to report on the status of all accounts to the Fiscal Committee and to the board on a monthly basis.
And I would note that in the Fiscal Committee, Brendan Sweeney, who's our ANF analyst, affirmed, he was an attendee on the phone at the meeting, affirmed exactly the statement that ANF, in concert with EOE and EEC, will be attentive to the budget next year, so that if this does result in any sort of a deficit, it can and will be addressed.
All right, so any questions or discussion?
Joan, go ahead.
Thanks. So I'm certainly in support of the proposed increase, but I do see sort of two perspective issues. One is, I think, what you're alluding to. If you start to do the math and you look at this in the context of the FY20 budget parameters, we could be getting uncomfortably close and need to, I think, pay attention, as you're saying, to a potential deficit within the caseload accounts. And so obviously, working closely with the administration on that is going to be incredibly important, but also really thinking about where those funds derive from, I think, is going to be something that we're going to be paying close attention to. The other issue that I see, particularly when looked at in view of the caseload data, is that we know that we're already seeing increased costs per slot because of the new regulations. We know that we're seeing increased caseload numbers already on both DTA and supportive before the new programs referenced here are going into place. And we also are seeing, I think, a predicted uptick in waitlist for kids who are general priority, right? So kids who are not priority population but are coming in under IE, we're already seeing more kids, about 1,100 more this time last year, today than this time last year. So I think the two critical things that we want to be attuned to are the budget, but also IE access. That continues to be a challenge, and it's likely, based on trends, to become more acute. And I think we just need to be really transparent about the hard choices in front of us on that.
Go ahead, Carolyn.
It was brought up earlier in public comment about some available funding, either unspent CCDBG funds or other funds that might be available. Is that an accurate statement?
Neither statement is inaccurate, but both really need to be explained. So the CCDBG funds have been a constant source of discussion with EOE and EEC, and for the most part are addressed and targeted for various activities that have occurred or that will occur. There is anticipated to be about a $20 million surplus in the caseload account. We certainly, in discussions over the past year with ANF, have addressed the possibility of a PAC. That is not part of what the presentation is in either the House or Senate budgets, but it is known to be funds that are there. I think in response to that, and as part of this, that's why ANF is committed to saying we will look at this and not allow a deficit, particularly because both the DTA and DCF programs are administration-driven. They were fully in support of each. And in fact, I think, as the Commissioner said, the DTA program, which was intended as an FY20 program, was perceived to be so valuable and necessary, they asked us to implement it this year, earlier than anticipated.
Commissioner.
Carolyn, I just had a thought. As I heard your question, I understood the question was, are there any CCDBG funds that are part of the increase to the quality funding that was received by the state over the course of the last year that remain unexpended? And I think, Bill, you offered part of that answer, which is that a significant portion of them are actually budgeted into the current budget for FY19 and would be part of maintaining the annualized costs of those programs heading into FY20. There is a portion, however, that probably is not yet accounted for within the anticipated allocation over the course of the 2 federal fiscal years under which we're expecting, that commitment. Is that correct, Bill?
So as we look at the liquidation period and the obligation period, I think that that's a fair statement. I also understand that as we've been working with EOE and others on this, there are anticipated needs and uses for these funds in addition to what we've already budgeted to supplement some of the to sustain some of the changes we've already made.
Okay, I was just wondering if there was any available funding to cover this increase.
Can I just also echo, Madam Chair, the concern that I heard, which I completely understood, and which was a concern that was raised by the field as we were having conversations related to how to spend what is a significant increase, the first time in 20 years, from the federal government for the Child Care Development Block Grant. It would be helpful, I think, for us to better articulate for the board and for the field and for the general public how those dollars are being spent in the context of revenue coming into the department generally. So it's important for everyone to understand that those dollars aren't articulated discretely as an increase. They're part of a larger pool of revenue that includes general fund dollars, state taxpayer dollars, both to secure the block grant and also to invest even more in the department. And the history of the department has been using the federal dollars or the state money that's needed to secure those federal dollars to almost entirely fund the department. And over the last 4 years, that's actually shifted significantly to say there's state-only investment. There are a lot of funding decisions that are being made that are supported entirely with state dollars, not relying on federal funds and not dependent on using the state dollars to match those federal funds. And this is another example in that direction of us having to make an investment to meet federal requirements that aren't necessarily backed 100% by federal dollars. So just important to try and understand all the moving pieces of the revenue and the spending. And most importantly, to recognize that over the last 4 years, we've now invested over $100 million in rate increases for the field. So just a huge commitment. This particular one's a requirement, but over the past several years, they haven't been. They've been really important policy decisions to say that our rates aren't high enough and they need to be higher. Thanks.
Can I shift gears and just suggest that I'm supportive of this, but I also want to flag something that I think is worth all of us maybe just having in the back of our minds over the next several months, and maybe somebody can shed some light on this. I hear, and I myself have always found the market rate survey to be sort of one way to think about this, but the drawing of lines and the kind of region idea, lots of ways, as we heard in public comment, to kind of question that strategy. Now, this presentation suggests that's what the Fed is using too, is the notion of a market rate. Do we have any signals from the Fed that they're going to get into this notion of true cost and maybe help with funding true cost studies, or do you have any signal that way? Because that's another piece of all of this. This rate increase aside, I am in total support, and I would never suggest that having rates this low is acceptable. That aside, strategic policy making in terms of the directionality, do we have any signal on that, Tom, Commissioner?
Thank you, Chair, for the question. Yes, but is my answer. The federal government has indicated that the cost of care is an issue that they recognize for the reasons that were discussed in public comment and reasons that have been surfaced in the course of this conversation, is perhaps more relevant than the market rate as strictly interpreted would be. And they've indicated an interest in finding ways to be able to promote how states might be able to do cost of care analysis, and particularly in service of trying to maintain a higher quality of services. The but, however, is that, and I say this with respect to our federal partners, our experience has been, and maybe I'll just make it personal so that it doesn't get borne by anybody who would be here over a longer period of time than I will be, is that those types of issues, when raised by the federal government, have not really materialized into any real explicit supports or directions on these matters. And so I think what I would what I would advise the board and the agency is that should this be an area that the Commonwealth wants to pursue, I would indicate that it should be done independent and without any expectation that the federal government will arrive at an answer any sooner than we would otherwise be able to arrive at ourselves. And in fact, if we were to wait probably for federal guidance or federal support, I wouldn't be surprised if in 3 years' time we were having the same conversation. So to the extent that I think this is something that we would want to pursue directionally, it's one that I think would benefit from priority coming from the board, from the agency, and probably taking our own independent leadership on this issue.
I want to echo that, and also just for historic context, note that there had been some independent analyses looking at the cost of quality historically. We know, for example, that roughly 85% of that cost is driven by labor market costs, and there have been some analyses to that effect that have been helpful. But I think part of what your question raises is, I think implicitly, what does it take for us to move toward a tiered rate system in which we're actually incentivizing and supporting the cost of quality, and how imperative that will be as we begin to roll out components of QRIS and other facets of this system, because what we're talking about are essentially critically important program quality infrastructure in support of educator development and delivery of high quality curriculum that requires time, which is expensive. And so if we're going to ask people to make those kinds of changes at the program level, we're going to have to be incredibly mindful of the payments and incentives that go along with supporting that change. And so I would favor asking the kinds of questions that you're suggesting sooner rather than later, so that we can put all of those pieces in place.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I was hoping that the answer would be that with new regs and supplemental funds, et cetera, there was some piloting or some sparky innovation kind of work around the cost of quality. I would agree with you, though, Joan. I think sooner rather than later, particularly when we look at the kind of portfolio that the agency is currently mounting, which has a quality which has a very strong view about increasing quality, including the ECSO, which is effectively sort of getting into this space of what does it cost. And so I think that while we may want to, of course, we'll need to stay with the market rate for compliance purposes, and it will continue to have legs for all kinds of reasons, just this gives me a renewed sense that there's a way in which we may need to attend to this issue sooner rather than later.
Just to build on that and also echo some of the public comment we heard from Bill Eddy, is that the history of this is that cost tracks often much more to factors of affordability in the area where the child care is being provided, not necessarily the cost to the provider or what the provider would like to be paying, for instance, the salaries of their staff. So it's a really nuanced conversation that I agree, Joan, needs to be looked at in the context of a tiered rate structure. And the other awkward imperfection of the market rate survey is that the catchment areas, to Bill's point, are really large regions of the state that have a lot of pockets of different levels of family income and ability to afford and pay for childcare, and may or may not be representative of the families that EEC is trying to serve. So trying to add at least some more nuance to the market rate survey process would help us make sure that our market rate percentiles, as imperfect as they might be, are still trying to address some of that discretion across and among and between different zip codes.
Yeah, we did make some strides in that regard more recently, which I'm sure you guys can probably better describe that might be helpful. But also, I think adding to the nuance is really understanding what role EEC plays as payor that in essence depresses the market rate in a lot of regions or segments of regions, which is another complication. Do you want to speak to how
so we
revise
did
the
have,
market rate?
in anticipation of the last market rate study, we had an advisory committee representing family child care, the union, center-based, in all the regions to contribute to the questions we asked and how we asked them in response to criticisms from the market rate study from 2 cycles ago, where what Bill Eddy mentioned this morning was in fact an issue. So we tried to address some of those discrepancies through that. Another thing that we did pretty consciously, again with the assistance of the advisory committee, was to target towns that we knew exactly had the discrepancy that the Undersecretary mentioned. So for instance, one that comes to mind is Framingham, Natick. There were other towns as well where we said, well, the the median income in this town is pretty high, but right next door, it's very different. And we tried to account for that as we looked at the rates and represented them in the survey. Still imperfect, but a direction toward improving what we had done 2 surveys ago.
Great. So, assuming that I'm reading the room correctly, I'll go ahead and make a motion that the Board of Early Education and Care hereby approves the department's recommended increases to all reimbursement rates paid to providers of subsidized early education and care services to each region and program type in varying percentages to effectuate an increase to the reimbursement rate to attain the 25th percentile as determined by the 2018 market rate study effective July 1, 2019, as presented at the board meeting of May 14, 2019. Do I have a second? All in favor? Aye. Abstentions? Opposed? Great. Thank you very much. Motion carries. That was a long sentence. I would have grammatical edits if that were my student.
Those are the longest motions I've ever heard.
Okay, third agenda item on the heels of that one, actually very fitting. There's Bill.
Here I am.
Hello, Amanda. On the FY20 budget update, thank you.
So the intention today was for Sean Reynolds to present alongside Amanda Sakaguchi, but Sean had an emergency appendectomy Friday, which we think was his excuse not to present. So, maybe a little harsh. All right, I'll give it to you. Right. So, Sean also thinks that he's given birth to his belly button, and that's the reason that he's not going to be here for a few days. In any case, here we go with our FY20 budget update. And staying with the theme of weather, we are about to rain down on you an awful lot of good news and shower you with things that we think are going well. Interestingly, in a meeting yesterday with a provider, the question was asked, off the record, the individual said to me, do you really think that Governor Baker is in support of childcare? And I had to say, yes. If you were to look at our budget and look at our budget over the last 6 years, as we've presented every fall, what you constantly see is an increase in EEC's budget and a recognition of the good work that's done here. As the Undersecretary mentioned, over $100,000 in rate increase. As you'll hear in this presentation, numerous creative programs. There's tremendous support for what we do, and I think it's being reflected in what I'm about to present to you. Some of this is old news. You're pretty well aware already of the House budget. Amanda's going to present the Senate budget because she had come to us from Senate Ways and Means and is very familiar with the process there as well. All right? So we'll jump in. Do you have the clicker, Amanda? Do you want to? Yeah. All right. So as you folks know, in mid-April we got the House Ways and Means budget, and it was good news for EEC. Overall for the state, the governor was recommending about a $43 million increase, but specific to EEC, which is what we here in this room care about dramatically, is a budget of $658 million, about a $25.5 million or a 4% increase. And we are always careful saying that because some of our sister agencies don't enjoy such attention, but we do. The House Ways and Means budget focused on infrastructure, personnel, which is really essential. We did a review in the past couple of months of the percentage of budget of personnel in our admin budgets, and EEC is the lowest, or about 2.5% of our admin budget is dedicated to personnel, where other state agencies cross over 20 to 25%. So we were pleased with that. Notable items in the House Ways and Means budget is the $20 million for a rate increase, which is what Bill Eddy was directing his comments to in his public testimony. An additional $5.5 million in what we call the quality account, which is extremely important because that is where our staffing capacity is and system improvements. As we have been working to staff up to address that 2.5%, to address what's happening with BRC, with LMS, with the learning management system, with monitoring of funds in the field. It is about staffing capacity, and some of it is mathematical. More people gets the work done. The teacher qualification unit is an example of that. And so the additional funds there was extremely helpful for us. The career pathways, what we call career pathways, which is referred to as the provider higher education opportunities, the House gave us $5 million to be supported with revenue from gaming, and there were two pieces of that you might recall from the last budget, and a pack of unspent funds from FY19. The budget in 19 was such that by the time the budget came out, by the time we had approval in the spending plan and released the RFR for structure of the program, there wasn't enough opportunity, nor did we want to spend the entire appropriation in a condensed period of time, because it wouldn't lend itself to the succeeding year when the same amount of money would have to be spent over a longer period of time. So there is a pack there. And a brand new program, the Neighborhood Village Pilot Program, an investment of $1 million to create a new mixed income model of affordable, high-quality childcare that begins at birth. What then evolved, of course, from the House Ways and Means to the House final is that the House passed a budget of about $43 billion, adding about $71 million through the process. Aside from a handful of earmarks, and we do talk about those later, there was very little change in the deliberations. Again, good news for us, which is very good. At the close of the debate, our budget came in at about $658 million, or about $25.6 million more when compared to last year. This chart is a chart I believe you have seen in the past, which is the chart at the time of the House budget. Later, you'll see a chart in this presentation that talks about what came through with the Senate Ways and Means funds a couple of weeks ago. But this shows you the migration of money from FY19 to where we ended up after the House budget. And to be clear, we try to show you these dollars without earmarks, because earmarks are sort of an additional piece added to an appropriation that can skew what's really being spent in an agency. So the bottom line on the right, what you see is, $25.5 million, really, really wonderful. Now I'll turn it over to Amanda.
Hi, my name is Amanda Sakaguchi. I don't think I've ever presented in front of the board before. I'm the Assistant Finance Director here at the agency. So, hi everyone. Yeah, filling in for Sean while he's out, so. yeah, exactly. On May 7th, Senate Ways and Means released its budget recommendation totaling $42.7 billion in spending. It's about a 3.1% increase over the FY19 GIA. For EEC specifically, Senate Ways and Means proposed $639.6 million. It's about $7.5 million more than what was available to us this year. But it is $18.1 million less than what the House proposed. Some of the highlights of the Senate Ways and Means budget is the $8 million that was included in the quality supports account to help us with our IT infrastructure and also personnel, particularly in the field. Additional $2.4 million for Head Start grants. And the CPPI grant was level funded, but it was also, there's language in there to pack $2.5 million from FY19 into FY20. And this is just the summary of the Senate Ways and Means budget. They debate next week, and there's a little over 1,100 amendments that they'll be going through. 2-3 days, usually they go through all of them. So we'll have more for you at the next board hearing. Looking at accounts specifically, so in the quality account, both the House and the Senate budget fulfills the agency's maintenance needs. The major difference between the two is how much they give an additional for CCDBG compliance. The House budget gives about $5.5 million in additional funding, and the Senate budget gives the full $8 million that was included in House 1.
Caseload funding is always noteworthy and important to look at because it is the huge percentage of our budget and what we do. What you can see is that for FY20, there was an increase of funds dedicated to childcare, which is very good. As we work with A&F throughout the year, we know and report to them frequently on what the maintenance costs will be, the number of children coming in, and what it would be, and that is reflected here. It does reflect where the governor's support also was from House 1, and so notwithstanding the issues that we brought to your attention earlier about the DTA and DCF programs and where we might be, the level of support in the budget process here is strong. Other notable things to point out to you, in the admin account, we did note what the 3 earmarks are that went into the budget process. These may not survive the budget process, but this is where we are at this point. Should they come to pass, we work with these, any earmark to justify the budget. We require that a budget come in from them, and we give them a contract for the funds. Head Start did get an increase in the budget of $2.4 million, by $1 million, excuse me, and then the Senate recommended increase in the item by 2.4, which is noteworthy because Head Start does tend to get that kind of attention and support throughout the year. And finally, in the Coordinated Family Community Engagement Program, or CFACE, there is a $300,000 additional money for the Parent-Child Home Program, which in effect becomes an earmark of $600,000 for that program.
There were a couple items that were included in the House budget that were not included in the Senate Ways and Means version. The $20 million rate reserve, the $1 million for the new program, the Neighborhood Village Pilot Program, the $5 million for the Career Pathways Grant, and the $1 million for Reach Out and Read. The Senate did have their kind of initiative that they put in their version of the budget, the CPPI grant. So those are just some of the conference dynamics that we're going to go into. The other line items that are pretty similar, access management, both funded at the same level of $8.7 million. Early childhood mental health consultation are both at $2.5 million. And then the Title IV contingency contract, it doesn't really go to our bottom line, but it helps with the Title IV claiming. So we work with EHS on this one. And like I was saying earlier, the Senate goes in debate next week. Usually it's 2 or 3 days that they'll debate before Memorial Day weekend. Then once that has finished, the House and the Senate will establish a conference committee, 3 members from each side. And once that is finalized, it'll go to the governor for his approval, veto, and usually he has 10 days to review. And then hopefully it'll be passed in July.
And there we are. Any questions on the FY20 budget?
No questions, just a quick comment, and thanks for the detail here, but I appreciate that the vote of the board on the rate increase today allows us to move forward on that ahead of whenever the budget will be enacted. So really important and great timing to be able to have the fiscal teams lead up to that, which is a substantial amount of effort, happen in May and June.
Correct. Thank you for that vote. It will allow us to release the contract amendments almost immediately, and we've already begun work on CCFA to put it in anticipation of a vote.
And the only other quick comment I just wanted to make is that we've had good opportunities to meet with both the House and Senate over the last several weeks since our last board meeting, and clarified and shared more information about the increase in the quality account that the governor recommended. I think the Senate coming out at the same amount is a good indication that they're understanding the rationale for that increase, and I'm cautiously optimistic that we'll see that amount coming out of conference committee, and really heartened to see that recognition of the department needing caseload dollars, also at the governor's level, rate increase dollars, and capacity and quality dollars. It's those combination of funding sources and uses that make it successful to operate the department and give the field what they need to support our kids. Thanks.
I have just two comments, just because it's a public meeting and we're on record. First, I really do hope that the CPPI funds go through, which is to say, you know, we kind of brought this to the field in a hurry. Bunch of communities scrambled. We got those monies out the door quickly, and it's too short a period of time for them to really do work that will matter and have enough traction. So I just go on record to say I really hope that now that we've launched that initiative, that the state continues. It's certainly very small dollars in the context of a notion of universal preschool or preschool expansion, but it's an important start, and I hope that we can help the field with continuity in that regard. The only other thing I would say is I do also, just while we're in a public meeting, early childhood mental health consultation has very strong effects in the literature. It's really well supported, and it's an important aspect of direct service in the context of a mixed delivery system. So I just noted that for today. Other
I wanted to follow up on Bill's earlier point about progress over the course of recent years on the budget front, and I wanted to specifically commend our staff here for the contribution that you've made to it. There clearly is a necessary level of support from the administration and from the legislature, but I think it's really important for the board to know, and I think there's appreciation for this, that fundamentally among the most important things are all of the details that are handled day to day by our staff and the manner in which they engage the important parties who are part of this process, the Ways and Means committees, the other members of the legislature, the administration, particularly through A&F and the Executive Office of Education. And I want to credit Bill and Sean and Amanda. I want to credit Kathleen Hart, who handles a lot of our legislative relations, Andrea Gilmore, who's often called upon to provide the data to support the increase that we're getting from the legislature. Over the course of the last 6 years that I've been here, the caliber of the experience that that team has delivered to the legislature has been absolutely instrumental to the progress that we've seen. In each and every case, they've been ultra responsive, they've been thorough, skillful. They have really developed and nurtured the relationships and built trust with all of those parties. And that has been really the essential ingredient to the progress that we've made. And I think it's important to note on the heels of this presentation, and in particular because while this is Amanda's first presentation to the board, and I think you can expect to see Amanda at the table much more often as we're moving ahead, and she's already been a big contributor and will continue to be a big contributor, there's the possibility that this may be Bill's final presentation to the board.
No, say it isn't so.
Which I know you're very disappointed about, Bill. But Bill has provided scores of presentations to this board over the course of his highly successful career, and we'll have an opportunity to recognize him much more adequately over the course of the next 6 weeks. But Bill has been the leader behind all of that, and I wanted to just point that out at this time, and thank you, Bill, for everything that you've done to give this agency the high level of credibility that I think we've been able to achieve and have been able to leverage to great effect in getting the necessary resources into this agency. So thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Commissioner. And certainly I know the board shares those sentiments. Next item on the agenda has to do with remote participation by board members. And so we'll hear a presentation that's sort of focused on this topic, and to the extent that it makes sense, we will look to a vote in this domain. Thank you, Caroline. Caroline?
Yes.
Yes.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Caroline Hayes Lopez. I'm one of the Assistant General Counsels here at EEC. Continuing with the theme today, this is the first time I am presenting in front of the board as well, so I'm happy to be here. So I'll talk a little bit about remote participation today. So on our agenda today, I'll discuss briefly the open meeting law, and then the remote participation provision, which is under the open meeting law. I'll talk about what would need to be done by the board in order to adopt remote participation, and then once, if remote participation is to be adopted by the board, what the requirements would be for us to use it. So under the open meeting law, which is found under Mass General Laws, Chapter 30A, Sections 18 to 25, the regulations being found at 940 CMR 29. Under these regulations, EEC's board qualifies as a public body because it is a multiple member board within the Commonwealth's executive branch. Subcommittees of EEC's board also qualify as public bodies. As part of the open meeting law, under 940 CMR 29, Section 10, there is a provision regarding remote participation. This permits members of public bodies, such as EEC's board, to participate in board meetings remotely under certain circumstances. It's specified there if physical attendance would be unreasonably difficult. However, members of public bodies are strongly encouraged to physically attend meetings whenever possible. A member participating remotely during a meeting of a public body may vote during the meeting and would not be deemed absent for that meeting. The regulations do not require the board to permit members of the public to participate remotely. This is just applying to the board and the board's members. So in order to adopt remote participation, EEC's board may adopt remote participation by a majority vote of the board. If the board does adopt remote participation, it will then apply to all subsequent meetings of the EEC board and any EEC board subcommittee meetings. Once remote participation is adopted, the board may enact additional policies, rules, or regulations to further restrict its use. One instance of that today is our board chair is recommending today that the motion include the parameter that board members must be physically present for at least 6 board meetings per year in order to remain in good standing. Additional policies, rules, and regulations could be adopted later on down the road as long as those measures do not violate any state or federal laws. EEC's board, once it has adopted remote participation, may then revoke its adoption through a majority vote of the board, and that may occur at any time. So if EEC's board is to vote for in favor of remote participation, there are some requirements that go along with that must be followed if remote participation is to be used by board members. The board must use a form of technology that enables the remote participant and any persons present at the meeting location to be clearly audible to one another. Some of the examples given for this are audio and video conferencing, whether through telephone, internet, or satellite. Some sort of chat or instant message feature with no audio would not be allowed under that provision. The board also must make accommodations for any board member who requires a form of adaptive telecommunications if they are a remote participant. For remote participation to be utilized, a quorum of the board must be physically present at the meeting location, including the person chairing the meeting. The person who, either the chairperson or the person who is acting as the chair, must be physically present at the location. When remote participation is being utilized, all votes must be taken by roll call vote, and the chair must announce the names of members participating remotely at the start of the meeting. The names of those members participating remotely must also be recorded in the minutes of that board meeting. The minutes must also note if the remote participant is disconnected from the meeting and what time this occurs. Should an instance like that occur, the chair may decide how to proceed if there are any technical difficulties. The regulations for remote participation encourage the board to suspend discussion while reasonable efforts are made to correct the problem. Likewise, as we noted before, if remote participation is disconnected, the minutes must note the time at which it occurred. So that's the overview of the requirements of remote participation. So at this point, I'd open it to any discussion.
I guess I just have a question, having been on this board for quite some time. This is coming up new for any particular reason, or?
I just said to the commission, we might need to back up one tiny bit more. Although you must be listening with real
Particular-
thoughts about benefits.
I wondered if the term unreasonably difficult
Yeah, I know.
refers to the Massachusetts Turnpike.
By definition. By definition. So wonderful question, as always, Mary, and we were just sidebarring over here. So this has arisen in particular, I'd say, over the course of maybe the last year and a half, with the intensity of activity within the agency and then a commensurate intensity of activity at the board level, particularly at the subcommittee level. There's been an appreciation of the challenges for board members, especially at the subcommittee level, to be able to be physically present for meetings. And so as we studied what has evolved as technology has enabled for different methods of participation and best practices, we thought this would be a good time to bring this to the board for your consideration and a determination as to where to best sort of land the possibility of remote participation within this agency's work. As you can tell, even within the best practices, there's a strong encouragement for physical participation. And in fact, the final motion that the department is proposing, and we provided you with language for that motion this morning, would, in particular for this meeting, the monthly board meeting, would really want to continue to very strongly encourage your physical participation. But with respect to other activities, make some allowances on the subcommittee level for folks to be able to participate remotely. And then in absolutely necessary situations, participate remotely for these meetings. So it's really a function of our observations as the work has evolved, and we've seen the challenges that have been encountered by board members in thinking about how we might create the most effective and efficient processes, but also balance the trade-offs that sometimes come between forfeiting some face-to-face time and but also maybe limiting that by having too strict of a requirement for physical participation. We thought that this was an appropriate place to land, and we wanted to bring it forward for the board's discussion and potentially for a vote should the board elect to do so. Is that helpful?
Yes, thank you.
I'd also just say that the baseline sort of minimum 6 board meetings per calendar year to remain in good standing, being physically present, is totally consistent with the Board of Elementary and Secondary Ed. So it's sort of where we got that from. So I appreciate the clarification. I think in general, as a norm, we want to be physically present, but I appreciate just having the clarification and the sort of written policy around what is expected and or allowable, in my view. Should I go ahead and make a motion? It's another long one. Get ready. I move that the Board of Early Education and Care, in accordance with General Law, Chapter 30A, Sections 18 to 25, and 940 CMR 29.10, hereby adopts the use of remote participation for its board meetings and board subcommittee meetings, with the requirement that board members physically attend at least 6 board meetings per calendar year to remain in good standing. I have a second. All in favor? Abstained? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Caroline.
You're 1 for 1 on your motions.
That's great.
A better percentage than that.
Great. We will move now to spend a half an hour or so on an update on StrongStart. We have Ola Friday and Amy Whitehead-Plood joining us. Thank you.
Thank you. Hello, good afternoon, good morning, everyone. Feels like good afternoon. Yeah, and it's our pleasure to have a chance to speak with you this morning about Massachusetts StrongStart. So a little bit about our presentation today. We hope to provide you with a deeper understanding of the activities that we're undertaking with regard to Massachusetts StrongStart. This was launched at the end of April, so it's begun to saturate the field. We've begun to get a lot of questions and interest in Massachusetts StrongStart, so want to have this opportunity to share some of that with you. So starting with, what is Massachusetts StrongStart? So this is an integrated system for supporting early educators and programs and providing high quality early education and care. The goal really is to support programs and educators as they serve children and families throughout the Commonwealth in our programs. The reason why we're doing this is to better integrate our quality standards and our workforce supports. And it's important to note that the initiatives included under Massachusetts StrongStart aren't new initiatives. Truly, they are realigned, repackaged to better integrate these various components of the work. A little bit about the background here with Massachusetts StrongStart. Originally, this work began as the brand for the future QRIS, so started in the QRIS revision process. Back in 2015, we began to work with Public Consulting Group to develop the name, the logo, the tagline, again, specifically to QRIS at that time. Over the next couple of years, we continued to develop the brand by including focus groups, in-person meetings, surveys with stakeholders inside the agency, outside the agency, and including families. And this was a statewide series of focus groups and feedback sessions around Massachusetts StrongStart, really to develop and then to refine the look and feel of the brand. However, then in 2018, through the introduction of the Massachusetts Professional Development System concept paper, we had a greater understanding that we needed to focus our efforts in a much more concerted way across both program quality and workforce. And so there was a need then to be able to communicate about these initiatives in a cohesive and concerted, aligned way. So at that time, the Massachusetts StrongStart brand was expanded beyond the scope of QRIS, really to encompass both the QRIS and the workforce initiatives. Absolutely.
I think this would be a good time to note as well is that while this serves a really important communication interest that the agency has and the field needs, it also reflects the changes in the way in which we've organized ourselves internally. And perhaps I think that's maybe even more important to recognize here is that what falls under StrongStart now had previously been discrete efforts and initiatives within this agency that would occasionally be aligned, but in ways that weren't frankly natural. And by organizing ourselves in the way that we have, particularly in aligning our program quality work and the professional development work, and I think it's just embodied by the fact that we have both Amy and Ola presenting here together today. It's also, I think, an important acknowledgement of the way in which the agency's work is maturing, and this alignment is done through our operations as well as through our branding. And the branding is terribly important, so it's good that we're introducing this in the way that we are today, but I wanted to make sure that there was acknowledgement given to sort of what is sort of under the hood here at EEC with respect to StrongStart.
Right. And speaking of what's under the hood, this is what we're talking about when we're talking about Massachusetts StrongStart. So talking about foundational standards as well as workforce initiatives. As you look here, you'll see that these are familiar, it's familiar work. It's the work that we're currently undertaking as a department, and it's work in transformation as we begin to move forward in some of the new grants and some of the new initiatives that we've begun to talk about today, both with regard to, for example, the ECSOs, but also as we begin to think about these as an aligned system. The charge, for example, that was given to the Workforce Council in a lot of respects begins here as we begin to think about a reimagined foundational standard and workforce initiative. So Ola and I will begin to share a little bit about each of these. We'll point out where there are where the current work is and then where we're going in the future as we move forward into Massachusetts StrongStart. So first in the foundational standards category is the QRIS and the QRIS interim changes. We've talked a lot about the QRIS in previous meetings, and I'm sure we'll continue to talk about it again in the future as we revise and we begin to implement the QRIS. For the future purposes, our QRIS 2.0 will be known as StrongStart to Program Quality and will be featured as one of the key components under Massachusetts StrongStart. As you know, when the new QRIS is launched, programs will be grandfathered in at their current QRIS level, but those ratings will expire in time and a renewal cycle will be included as part of the QRIS revision. You also know that we've worked very hard to focus the future QRIS, and what's very different from the current QRIS is that there are intentional goals around our quality initiative in Massachusetts, organized into a 4-star system in the future. However, we also recognize the need to introduce some interim changes to address the current QRIS that we have between the current system and when we'll be able to implement the future system, the StrongStart to Program Quality. The QRIS interim changes were launched just last week as part of the Massachusetts StrongStart initiative. They make it easier for programs to participate in the current QRIS by further streamlining and further eliminating duplication in the current standards. as the secretary had said before, kind of skinnying up the current QRIS in those ways to really promote program participation. And another key piece of Massachusetts StrongStart that we hadn't discussed previously but is important to note is that it is a way to generate interest in and excitement for the workforce initiatives and the quality work that's happening at the department.
All right. Thanks, Amy. So the second set of foundational standards are what we're calling our core knowledge and competencies. So these outline the essential knowledge and skills that educators and administrators should be able to know and demonstrate in their professional practice. And increasingly moving forward, our higher education coursework, our training opportunities will all be aligned to these core knowledge and competencies so that educators and administrators can clearly know when they're engaging in professional development what competencies they are developing through that action. And the impetus for these new core knowledge and competencies are really the coming together of what are two existing documents that really guide training and development in our current field. So firstly, the widely used categories of study that drive the teacher qualifications requirements. We're all familiar with those, but we also have core competencies in Massachusetts as well. These are lesser utilized. And so really this endeavor was to bring together these two guiding sets of documents to create one unified body of standards that would really outline what our core expectations are for the field. And so that's work that we're engaged in right now, and we're geared to really finalize that effort at the end of this fiscal year and bring it to you all into the field more broadly for input, communication, and to actualize it. So now moving on to the workforce initiative section of that graphic that we showed you. So firstly, we want to talk about the StrongStart online PD system, professional development system. This is work that we've introduced to you before. And you might know that this is a part of our larger integrated workforce development IT system here at the agency. Firstly, we're talking about bringing together and developing a learning management system. This would be a place where educators and administrators would be able to access online training and coursework. They would also be able to access a training calendar so that in the future you could actually register for also in-person training through the online system as well. So really it becomes a centralized repository for all of our identified quality training and professional development opportunities for the field. That's work that we're engaging in developing right now, and we're gearing up to release the LMS portion of the online PD system in the next few coming weeks, really to support the health and safety trainings that we've talked about as well. The other component of the developing online PD system is a revamped professional qualifications registry. So we're really excited to bring this out to the field so that we have real-time data on where educators are in our system in terms of their qualifications, their training, where they're employed, their demographic information. So this would really give Massachusetts a very clear sense of who the educators are in our state in a way that we don't have currently, and also to be able to track their progression over time. So we're really excited to bring that to the field. This will be part of our phase 2 of the development of the online PD system, so that will be deployed in the next coming months as well. Another component of the online PD system, there are many components, is also the revamping of what's now our teacher qualification system. It's a antiquated, perhaps, legacy system. And so we're really excited to really create a more robust teacher certification system that can support levels of certifications across our mixed delivery system. So not only for center-based staff, but also for family child care providers and after-school, out-of-school time staff as well. And that's work that will be phase 3 of this developing of the online PD system. Another component of the system as well is to support coaching. You know that coaching is increasingly a big part of our workforce agenda. And so we want to be sure that we're connecting the online PD system to our coaching efforts as well. And so if not housing the coaching component itself, certainly linking to any statewide coaching system that we have in place.
Ola, can you just clarify what you mean by that? Like when you say the coaching system, what do you mean?
Right.
in light of this is an online platform, right?
Yes.
So I'm
Yeah.
just trying to understand it in concrete terms, the coaching part.
So the online system will firstly support the sort of the flat provision of online training coursework.
For coaches.
No, for educators.
Uh-huh.
But we would also like to support educators to access coaching and other technical assistance opportunities as well. And so there is a possibility for this online system to support the engagement of educators in their coaching activities, but through the use of videos, perhaps, electronic communication between
I see.
coaches and
I see.
educators.
Got it.
Yes. The other part of the online PD system is its linkage to the QRS program manager, but not only to QRS, but also to our other agency systems, such as LEAD and the background record check. These systems all combine into what we call our enterprise model here at the agency. And so we're really looking to bring together all of the data systems that capture both educator and program information, so that we're getting a real holistic understanding of the workforce and the program quality in Massachusetts. Okay. So the other workforce initiative that's in the graphic, the early childhood support organizations, the commissioner spoke to the ongoing development of this work earlier in his remarks, so I won't belabor this, but just remind us that this is a real innovative public-private partnership with New Profit that we've been engaged in for some time now. And this work would be to recruit up to 4 distinct coaching models to support job-embedded professional development of early educators, really centered on particular curricular models, but also with the ability to adapt to support various curricula that programs use as well. These early childhood support organizations will provide targeted coaching and training to licensed centers and family childcare homes that engage in QRIS. These would be at level 2 QRIS, maybe moving on to levels 3 and levels 4. So we really want to support progression to the higher levels of the QRIS moving forward through this model. As a part of this partnership with EEC, we're going to be studying these designs and the implementation of these distinct coaching models. So there's a robust evaluation component as a part of this effort, so that we can really gain some insight into what's working with the models and which of the models, if any or all, that we want to really systematize and really embed into our future workforce development efforts. So we'll be looking at that over the course of about 4 years. As the commissioner noted, we do have a contract with New Profit to move this work forward, and the procurement to solicit the 4 ECSOs is currently out. The next workforce initiative, really near and dear to my heart, because this is work that my unit is leading, is what we're calling the professional development centers. So as you know, our educator provider support grant is sunsetting, and it has to. We have extended that as much as we can. And so the professional development centers will continue to provide intentional, regionally based training and technical assistance to our programs and educators across the Commonwealth. Now, these PDCs, as we call them, will focus on 3 main bodies of efforts. Firstly, they're helping educators and administrators navigate what we all know can be a very complex early childhood education system in terms of accessing information and supports. So we really want to streamline that access for our educators. Secondly, we're still committed to the provision of training and technical assistance to programs and educators in support of certification, and also in support of the maintenance of licensing requirements. So that is certainly central to the work of the regional PDCs. And thirdly, we're really excited about a robust, defined leadership coaching model that will be aligned to the QRS improvement goals and also licensing compliance. I want to just put a final point on the last statement. So with the PDCs, we're really excited to further develop our vision of increasingly providing targeted, training to educators in the context of their program's overall improvement goals. So really bringing together this idea of program quality and educator improvement as well, and aligning those efforts. So increasingly the PDCs will be helping us to enact that vision.
Can I just raise one issue here? And I'm sorry if this was raised at workforce and I have not been able to attend, but I'm sort of struck by your first goal. So we've got these professional development centers, but one of your 3 goals or areas of focus for them, your first one seems to me, just on its face, it doesn't really line up with professional development, professional learning, right? The notion of like navigating the terrain, which would strike me as an EEC level issue, which is to say we don't necessarily, I mean, we want some regional support, I guess, but I'm trying to understand it in terms of, you know, this is a tall order for them, right? They will necessarily be using every last resource to get to the field and support the provider, and I guess I wonder about how much we're going to ask them to do and how we're going to sort of systematize that navigation work in general. I'm just struck by it.
Yeah, so I'll say a few things. Firstly, it's work that the EPS currently do. You know, if you have a question about accessing training or technical assistance or other supports like scholarship or the QRS measurement tools, you know that there is a place to go to get that information. So we really wanted to call that out as a part of the scope of work of this grant. What I really wanted to do was also to talk more about career development supports.
Right. In other words, more on the council side.
Yes, exactly.
Right.
However, we felt the need to, given the many mandates under this contract, you know, we felt the need to really to scale back on that. No need, but that was certainly the intention. And I think moving forward in the development of this work, with hopefully increased dollars to support these efforts, we can go back to more of that career development support that we wanted to in the first place.
Right. So do you have materials or some kind of strategy to easily mount number 1, or are they curating?
So right now they are curating. This is a lighter touch, a lighter effort than what we're mandating. I think when we had envisioned much more around the career development piece that we would systematize.
Sure.
Thank you all. I'm just going to add to a point that you had already made. So this is activity that is already taking place within the EPS grant, which obviously we're trying to mature and retire. First thing I want to acknowledge is that in no way, shape, or form are we suggesting that the scale of what we are proposing here for PDCs is sufficient to the scale that we ultimately think needs to be achieved to be able to fully support, more adequately support the workforce development needs. And obviously we're now creating a series of complementary initiatives, the Career Pathways Initiative, the ECSO Initiative, and this PDC Initiative, which is intended to increase our scale. But even in combination now, we still see this as being at the early stages. As we talked about this internally, and again, another party that could be at the table to sort of demonstrate operationally how we've approached this in a way that's much more integrated is field operations. Participated in this conversation. These activities were really among the most important, relevant that they saw for EPS as a contribution to work with programs that had been identified as programs that had challenges. And so as we think about the ECSO initiative working with programs that are positioned effectively to begin to grow into the higher levels of QIS, we wanted to make sure that we were continuing to provide resources in a way for programs to more easily access the resources that they needed, who frankly are not at that level and are more challenged. And so I think that's a reflection of this here. It's still a lot of activities, even if we've narrowed it beyond where we would like to go. Which I think is important for us to maintain that ambition, but balance it off against the resources that we have here. But I think that speaks to why you see number 1 within this list.
Can you remind me how many centers we're talking about?
A minimum of 5, although we would encourage more.
Set number of centers, these PDCs.
Sorry, I guess and this maybe builds on a comment I was just going to make, and I appreciate the branding effort. It's really important to be able to communicate effectively under an umbrella. So, and all of the different moving pieces and the challenges that you're addressing on a number of different levels for a lot of different programs with a lot of different challenges. What I'm trying to understand is how foundational standards, which align to both program standards and workforce standards, then feed into what's called workforce initiatives, even though I think the majority of the initiatives are targeted at the program level. And it feels like there's a really important, as we're thinking about packaging and aligning, a really important question to understand whether EEC has the capacity to try and reach 100,000 or more members of the workforce versus being very intentional and thoughtful about how to reach about 9,000 licensed programs and their ability as employers to support their workforce as a fundamental component of improving all of the bullet points here, right? Outcomes for children. So it's a question of who EEC's primary audience is in these efforts and doing the branding and the thinking about it in that context to say these are program initiatives and your opportunity is to work with programs so they can effectively work with their workforce.
I think that just building on the comments of both Noni and Anne, in thinking about the role of a sort of strategic document that really speaks to the combined work that's under now the StrongStart umbrella, it is in part, I think, the opportunity to really look closely at exactly these questions, because I think what we're starting to see is that there's cross-cutting activity that's happening from different strands of, grants and activity and systems that we want to really understand, and also, I think, give us more leverage to think strategically about the unit of change. One of the things that I see emerging is a substantial focus on the sort of job-embedded professional development, program quality infrastructure, and support for educators in the context of the work. And then I think what number one speaks to is, I think, what Ola really described, which is also, in addition, thinking about educators as individuals on a career pathway. And so I think that there's room to take what we're seeing here a couple of steps further to get really explicit about what it is that we're doing and for whom.
And in some ways, like, the standards underlie the 6 buckets, right? So in this chart, in this graph, you'd almost have the standards here, or the standards here, and this is all quality improvement, like professional support and quality improvement. I mean, I totally applaud this. It's really great work, and I think, while too many, there are too many places where this is just not articulated at all, and so I think, kudos to you for this next step, and I know this has been a long time coming, and I am in total support, and I think there's still just some room to keep tinkering, and I really do support your discussion, Joan, at Workforce about a document and want to be entirely helpful in all of this work. It's really nice work.
I think one of the interesting places to respond to some of the comments that were just said around the way in which those foundational standards underlie the workforce initiatives, a good example could be found in the core knowledge and competencies and the work that we did to fully align the QRAS practices with what we're expecting from individual educators. And then you see the core knowledge and competencies being put into practice as we're working with educators, and then through the QRAS as we're working with programs. So that work is happening. It's kind of baked into this, but articulating it, I think, would be an important next step.
Yeah, and it's almost like the competencies and the standards are the foundational level that are kind of manifesting in these professional support and quality improvement initiatives, right, which is tremendous.
All right. Well, the last slide, which we, no?
That was really the last.
Oh, the second to last slide actually is a short timeline of the work. So just to recap, on April 25th, we sent out the Massachusetts StrongStart branding to the field. On May 6th, a communication regarding the QRS interim changes was launched. We are still working on introducing the learning management system to the field. There are some support components that we want to be sure are in place before we launch that, but that is coming very shortly. And then further in June 2019, the educators and programs will be fully introduced to the regional PDCs. That's a communication that we're planning to get out as well shortly to the field, so that there's it's clearly known that we are still committed to providing regionally based training and technical assistance, and that will not go away come July 1. Are there further comments or questions?
Just a quick question, because it was an issue that came up, was really how much change is underway and how important it is to communicate all of this well to the field, and just being mindful of what EEC is able to do on a regular basis. I guess I'm wondering whether there's a specific communication strategy around this work, and if there's opportunity to perhaps work with others who could help to really amplify the changes that are happening.
Great point. As part of the ongoing work that's been underway, starting with the background record check work, but having accelerated in particular over the course of the beginning of this calendar year in service of CCDBG activities, there was the establishment of a work stream to support communications and training, which is another really important and necessary component to success on a number of fronts, and also admittedly an area that the agency has, from a capacity standpoint, been deficient around. But through the activities for the background record check work and now these other CCDBG activities to support our compliance efforts for this September, we're building capacity with the idea that it would not only serve our efforts for September 30th, but would also be carried forward and create some ongoing capacity for the agency to support our communications and training efforts. This effort that's been underway for StrongStart preceded it, but we folded it into the ongoing work for communications and training. I think it's one that we're going to have to continually assess to ensure, and frankly, testing is probably not even we'll hear whether or not we are failing on the communication and training side. But I think we're going to want to continue to test whether or not the capacity that we're building is appropriate and sufficient to the tasks that we're trying to undertake. So it's been, I think, a really good growing opportunity for us as an agency, first piloting it with background record checks, which is by no means done, but also building it up and scaling it up in service of CCDBG and beginning to take other efforts like StrongStart, which are not necessarily CCDBG related, but are obvious priorities of the agency in continuing to kind of leverage the infrastructure that we're building over the course of this year in service of that on the communication and training front.
Thank you both, and I know it represents lots of others' work and lots of work over time. So thank you for the update, and we'll look forward to next steps.
Thank you. Thank you.
So that brings us to the end of our business for today. Thank you all for coming, and I fully expect to be in touch in the coming week or so on the June meeting and as the search progresses. So thank you all, and we'll be in touch soon.